Hello. So, GDPR, the light at the end of the tunnel. It's arriving. It's been many years in the preparation, all through the EU and latterly now being delivered into the UK. It's quite an important change, and it changes the ground rules for how quite a lot of business is done. It replaces the Data Protection Act, which has been around now for quite a few years, and delivers some very important new protection to cope with the changing shape of technology and the internet and things like that. But the impact on business is very dramatic, and you definitely need to be thinking about it and making sure everything you're doing is ready and appropriate to cope in the GDPR world. So I thought I'd take the chance to try and explain some of it to you. You obviously need to apply some of this very specifically to your own businesses and things, so check out the specifics, but in general terms we're going to try and go through some of the main implications. So first things first, when does it actually arrive? Well, it's kind of already in law, but it hasn't actually been given its teeth yet. Fully comes into law here in the UK on the 25th of May 2018. So as I'm talking to you, it's about a year away. There's a chance that the understanding about exactly what it means will still be taking some interpretation and some changes, I suppose, during the next year or so. So if you're looking at this at May 2018, do look at the latest guidance from people like the ICO. But first things first, if you're already used to the Data Protection Act, much of the GDPR is going to be almost identical to you. It's going to ask you and expect you to take very similar care of the data and of the data subjects at the other end of that data. If you're not used to the Data Protection Act particularly, then this is going to come as a big shock. It's coming out of nowhere, and it's got an awful lot of requirements that you need to pay attention to. So the Data Protection Act has been around for quite a few years. It first arrived back in the 90s. And the slight problem that it's had is that basically the world has changed and the Data Protection Act barely has. The world didn't look the same then, technology didn't do the same things. So back in the 90s, people didn't have laptop computers, or at least if they did, they were only just starting to be appearing. Portable data was almost unheard of, so USB sticks and things like that didn't exist. There were a few floppy disks around, but there wasn't much. Even things like mobile phones barely existed, and smartphones certainly didn't. So there's a whole host of things that have evolved quite a long way. And some of those evolutions have come with some interesting side effects, like cyberbullying and revenge porn and hackers and so forth. So there's all sorts of other things there which now mean we have to take care about data in ways that wasn't obvious back in the 90s, and so they didn't build it into the Data Protection Act. They have built it in now to try and address some of the problems associated with those changes. So finally, to wrap up this brief introduction to the GDPR, you might be asking yourself, can you just ignore it? I suggest you can't, but it really is going to sting if they catch you ignoring it, because it's meant to be very painful, it's meant to be dissuasive, that's the actual word that's used in the Act, for somebody to mess this up. Can you sidestep it? Perhaps you can just outsource it all to somebody else. Yes, but you can't ignore thinking about it, because all of the issues about outsourcing it are still your issue. You actually have to take responsibility that the processor who's doing that work is doing the right job in the right way as well. And you can't just wash your hands of it and hope that they're going to do it all for you. You need to have checked and made sure they do. I suppose you might be thinking, if you're not in the EU, perhaps even if you're in the UK these days with Brexit, that this isn't going to affect you. It absolutely is. If you have customers who are inside the EU, or if you're doing any of your data processing inside the EU, then it's going to affect you. So if you're some sort of global company, it absolutely is an issue, and you can't just ignore it. If you do ignore it, and if you do get it wrong, there's likely to be penalties. Perhaps not in the first instance. In the first instance, you might get a severely wrapped wrist and told to do it better. But the penalties are allowed for, and they're quite severe. It's up to 4% of your global turnover, or 20 million euros, whichever is the greater, so that's pretty painful. And in fact, within the penalties, there's also provision made for things like class actions in the style that we all understand from America, but it's fairly new in some parts of the EU. So those fines might seem pretty obscene, actually, and indeed the rules might seem excessive, but in fact, they're only really trying to ensure that you do a transparent and honest and a robust job of gathering data and using data, which is kind of fair to the data subjects in question. That can only be a good thing for you in the fullness of time, even if it's a headache trying to get there. that growth in trust will only help you get your day job done properly. In the next video, I'm going to attempt to try and describe a few of the main things that are changing and talk about some of the practical implications for you and your organisation. If you want to follow more videos, you can have a look here where you can see our other YouTube channel offers. Equally, if you want to find out anything further about Corpdata or how we may be able to help you, here's our web details and other contact information.